There has been a lot of talk in the past week and over this Easter weekend about the fact that the RCMP will be enforcing the Quarantine Act and visiting or looking for travelers who are not obeying their obligation to stay in self-isolation for the 14 days. Here we read an article that says Mounties could enter homes to enforce Quarantine Act orders if Canadians don't self-isolate. The RCMP is warning people they will do physical checks to enforce the Quarantine Act, while Prime Minister Justin Trudeau hinted Friday that the rules could be loosened this summer if Canadians act now to contain the spread of COVID-19. The police force says it has been asked to assist in enforcing the act in the midst of the pandemic. Officers could visit homes to ensure anyone entering Canada is self-isolating for the 14 days, and police can now make arrests rather than issue a court appearance notice or summons. When we look into the Quarantine Act itself, the federal enactment, in Article 15.3, we see the operation of law that's being used right now by the government agencies. It says every traveler shall comply with any reasonable measure ordered by a screening officer or quarantine officer for the purpose of preventing the introduction and spread of a communicable disease. So they are saying right now that you have to isolate for 14 days, and this is an order, this is a measure that's being forced upon the individual, upon the person, in order to stop the spread of the communicable disease. So they're using the statutory power and operation of law contained within the statutory power to say, we placed a measure upon you, and you are obligated to fulfill this measure. And now we're going to come look for you to make sure that you are indeed fulfilling these measures. Article 18 of the Quarantine Act. A peace officer may, at the request of a screening officer or quarantine officer, arrest without a warrant and bring to a quarantine officer any traveler who the peace officer has reasonable grounds to believe has refused to be isolated and refuses to comply with the measure under subsection 15.3. Article 15.3 said the traveler had to comply with any reasonable measure, but that they didn't inform us what the measures were that would be used against the traveler. However, now in Article 18, we see that the reason why the peace officer is going to arrest a traveler is because he has refused to be isolated. Very clearly, it says the peace officer has reasonable grounds to believe he, the traveler, has refused to be isolated. So this is what they're going to be using against individuals, against persons out there right now. If you have been ordered to isolate and you are not isolating and they catch you, they are going to arrest you, possibly fine you, or even bring you before the court that a judge may deal with you. Now, further to that, if you are caught up in this system, in this situation where they catch you not isolating, you can now be subject to undergo a health assessment. Article 19. A quarantine officer may require a traveler to undergo a health assessment if, subsection C, the traveler has contravened subsection 15.1 or 15.3. So if you're not isolating yourself, you're not following the orders for the 14 days to be in self-isolation, and you're caught, then they can bring you before a quarantine officer and make you or force you to undergo a health assessment. After a health assessment, you could also be subjected to a medical examination, and that's something that you totally want to avoid. You don't want to be caught up in this. So in Article 22 it says, if a quarantine officer has reasonable grounds to believe that a traveler has or might have a communicable disease, or is infested with vectors, or has recently been in close proximity to a person who has or might have a communicable disease, the officer may require the traveler to undergo a medical examination. Now, this medical examination will be done at a doctor's office. However, the expense of the test, of the examination, will be at your own peril. So you see it says here in Article subsection 23.3, the examination shall be at the traveler's expense and shall be conducted in the place where the traveler is detained. So what is that telling us here? If we look at the steps, it says the first step is we're going to tell you to isolate. then if you don't isolate and we catch you not isolating, you could or most likely will be subjected to a fine or brought before the court and subjected to a health assessment. Further to that, if they want to push the point, they can force you to take a medical examination. And this medical examination will be at your own expense, out of pocket. You will have to pay for. A health assessment under the enactment consists of the following. This means an evaluation of the relevant medical history and the travel history of the traveler, and a physical examination, including an examination of the traveler's head, neck, and extremities, and the measurement of vital signs such as the traveler's temperature, heart rate, and respiratory rate. So it's not so bad under the health assessment. Yes, it's still invasive. However, they're not taking your DNA or taking your blood. Next, if they submit you to a medical examination, then it goes a little bit deeper. It says this includes asserting the relevant medical history and the travel history of the person being examined, the conduct of a physical examination, and any laboratory tests or radiographic or diagnostic tests that are required to make a determination of whether the person might have a communicable disease. So you're talking about drawing your blood and having to submit to different types of testing. And all this will transpire against you or to you while you are being detained. The enactment is very clear. It says that you will be detained and then you will be submitted to a health assessment or further to a medical examination. Now, the health assessment has to happen within 48 hours after you've been detained. So they can detain you for 2 days before they render you to have your health assessment. Concerning a medical examination, the same time limit applies, the same time frame applies. So they have 48 hours in order to bring you before a medical practitioner that can perform the medical examination. So you're looking at least 4 days minimum if they want to be buggers against you, to hold you within prison, to force you to go through a health assessment and then a medical examination. Now, what if they find the COVID-19 or the coronavirus within you? What if you were an asymptomatic spreader or carrier? Or what if you have the virus and you weren't aware of? Are they going to quarantine you in a camp? Are the isolation camps coming soon? Who knows? But to be wise, it's just better not to get caught up in all of this. At this point, if you are interacting with the RCMP or perhaps a municipal police force, depending if they're going to expand the enforcement orders, you are already considered by them to not be listening to the orders, to not obeying the rules and not following public order, because now they caught you not self-isolating. So in their eyes, you're not someone who's going to be listening. If they do a health assessment and a medical assessment and they say that you have the COVID-19 virus, do you think they're just going to simply let you go to return home, hoping that you're going to listen now and self-isolate? Or do you think they're going to have a plan B in place, or are putting a plan B in place for individuals or people who are not listening?